What's going on? My name is John. I'm a hobbyist working out of a single car garage, and today we're going to take a shop tour. Now, I've been in this space for just under a year now, and for the first 6 years of this hobby, I had to set up and break down outside on my patio. All of the tools were stored in the shed. I can tell you that gets old really quickly. When I first got access to the garage, it really was a blank canvas. The only thing that was left in here from the previous owner was a workbench along the back wall, which you see right now. Now, I did try to make that work for a couple months, but after a while I soon realized that that was some valuable space and ended up taking it out. Now, the shop itself is a standard single car garage. It measures 12 feet wide by 20 feet deep. The two exterior walls are not insulated, but the interior wall and the ceiling are insulated. The only other limitations I have to work with in this space are two doors. Not a big deal, but something I had to plan around when I was laying everything out. But that covers the dimensions and the history of this space, so let's jump in the tour. In the front left of the shop is where I keep my bandsaw, C-3PO.
So this is probably a good time to tell you most of my tools are named after Star Wars characters. So if you don't like bad puns or Star Wars, sorry in advance. Back to the tour.
Now, I originally started out with a 10-inch benchtop bandsaw, and while I had no issues with the performance, there were some limitations when I was handling bigger material. So I did upgrade to a 14-inch floor model. Now, there's only 3 feet of outfeed behind the blade, but when I'm working with longer stock, I will just move the saw to the middle of the shop. Speaking of mobility, every single one of my tools, the miter station, the drill press cabinet, are on casters. So if I need to move something around, I do have the option, but I spent a lot of time focusing on the layout and the organization of this shop, so it's not a game of Tetris every time I want to use one of the tools. So what you're going to see today is what the shop looks like 99% of the time when I'm working day to day. And behind the bandsaw is where I store my trash can and the tracks for my Festool track saws. Above the track saws are Bob and Tim. Until recently, I was 99% certain that Bob and Tim had died, but I'm pretty certain that both of them moved the other day. Opposite the bandsaw is where I store my router table. Now, this was another one of those Facebook Marketplace deals that I found. At the time, I was not looking to buy a router table. It was such a good deal, you kind of felt like you were losing money if you didn't buy it. It came with the table, a Jessam lift, 3 routers, probably 30 or so bits, this fancy cabinet that you see here where I not so neatly store all of my router bits and all the other router accessories. Now, I have considered actually selling this entire kit and moving the router table into the side of the table saw. It would be nice to have this extra floor space for assembly and stretching and other fun activities, so it's something I'm considering in the future. In the front right corner, tucked behind the router table, is my 1.5 horsepower dust collector Boba Jet. Now, at the time of purchasing Boba Jet, I did not have any 220 in the shop, nor did I have any plans to expand to 220 in the future. That changed when I got my table saw, but quite honestly, even if I had known that I was going to add 220 later, I don't think I would have gone up to a 2 horsepower or a 3 horsepower system. Now, I don't have any hard lines plumbed in this shop. Quite honestly, I find that completely unnecessary in a shop this size, especially with limited ceiling heights. So what I do is I take my flex hose and I move it from tool to tool. I use a quick release clamp and it works just great for me. One of the other nice features about this system is that it does have a cyclone separator, so the majority of the chips fall down into this main barrel here. When it comes time to empty it, you simply release the latch, roll it outside, and then I dump it into the trash can. If I ever do upgrade to a bigger shop, I would probably upgrade to something bigger that could support hard lines and is really meant to service multiple tools. But for a small space like this certainly gets the job done. Above my dust collector is where I store my Crosscut sled Han Solo. I spent a lot of time with this sled making sure that it was dialed in so that it was 100% Dead on, balls accurate.
Dead on, balls accurate.
It's an industry term.
The fence is dead flat. I did add some creature comforts such as T-Track with integrated hold downs and then the Cat's Moses stop block. And overall, I can say that I use this for about 95% of my crosscuts, unless it's a rough breakdown, which is what I use the miter saw for. If you do not have a crosscut sled in your shop, or you have a crosscut sled and you're not terribly happy with the results, I highly recommend spending a little bit of time, get the thing dialed in, add some creature comforts where necessary, and I promise you, overall, it's going to improve the quality of your work. If you're wondering what this weird piano looking thing is above my head, that is an infeed table that is sold by Izzy Swan. It clamps right onto the front of the table saw, and I primarily use it when I'm handling large sheet goods or longer stock that needs a little bit more support in the front. In the center of the shop along the right hand wall is where I keep my 3 horsepower table saw, Darth Blader. Now I played around a lot with different locations for the table saw in the shop, and I can tell you if you're in a small space, the table saw really needs to be located in the front right of the shop. If you think about using a table saw, everything to the right of the extension wing is dead space, so there's no reason to not tuck it up against the wall. And when it comes to additional infeed length, you can simply open the garage door. For my setup, I have 7 feet of infeed length, which was extremely important to me. I do the majority of my woodworking at night and my neighbors are close by, so I have to keep the door shut. As far as the saw itself, the safety feature is the selling point, but I can tell you I have absolutely no complaints about the overall performance of it.
I love you, Darth Blader.
I did add the Jessam stock guides to this. If you're unfamiliar with the stock guides, they help to secure pieces up along the fence as they are pushing through the blade. Especially helpful when you're working with longer stock or with bigger sheet goods. First up on the left hand side of the wall is my drill press. Came time to move the miter station to the back wall. The drill press simply didn't fit there because of the door. Fortunately, I had the hindsight when I was building the miter station to make it modular, so removing it was not a problem at all, and this turned out to be a great spot for it. Now I really don't use the drill press for anything that requires a high level of accuracy. Quite honestly, I'm typically just using it to drill a bunch of holes at a consistent depth. But I will say overall, this is a great little drill press. I think it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 130 to 140 bucks brand new. It's easily the best bang for your buck in my shop. I do try and keep the drawers somewhat organized below it, although the first drawer is a total catch-all. In the second drawer is where I store my Craig system. Below that is where I keep my cordless nailer for Obi-Wan Kenobi. And last but not least is where I store my handheld routers. Next to the drill press is the first of 2 pegboard stations in my shop. Now a lot of people will tell you that French cleats are far superior to pegboards, and then a lot of other people will tell you that pegboards are far superior to French cleats. From what I've experienced in my shop, a combination of the two is the best of both worlds. As far as pegboard itself, I find it to be far superior for storing small things like drill bits and pliers. The holders themselves are extremely easy to make. I'll typically make them out of scrap wood, add a couple magnets in the back for stability, and then you're off and running. And I do find that if you have a home for everything, like drill bits and your pliers, you're much more likely to put it back in the right place instead of just throwing it into a drawer and then the drawer becomes a mess. Now, one of the major advantages that I've found for metal pegboards, especially for small storage, is the use of magnets. You can take something small like these Allen wrenches, epoxy a magnet to the back, and then you can plop this on wherever you'd like, and it's much easier than having to build an integrated system into a French cleat wall. So take that, French cleats. And above the pegboard is my only lumber rack in the shop, currently filled with a bunch of cedar, poplar, and some cherry. Underneath the pegboard is where I store my 8-inch jointer, Jabba the Cut. Now a jointer is by no means a necessary item. You can get by edge jointing on the table saw, and you can make sleds on the planer to face joint, but I can tell you it's one of those nice luxury items to have, and it makes the process of working with rough lumber much more enjoyable. As far as the placement of the jointer itself, when I first got Jabba the Cut, I tried to keep it in the front of the shop along the garage door. That turned out to be a horrible location. Then I tried to move it to the back of the shop, which turns out is an even worse location. And then I finally came to my senses that the miter station, which was living along this wall, needed to go to the back of the shop, and the jointer needed to be along the left-hand wall. Why on the left-hand wall is it better than in the front or the back? Well, the jointer is a lot like the table saw. You really don't want to have to move it to use it. So I've got plenty of infeed and outfeed length here, and for the most part the jointer stays exactly where you see it. And under the infeed of the jointer is my air compressor, which my shop assistant primarily uses to blow sawdust around. And on the back wall is my miter station. As you've heard a bunch of times in the tour already, the miter station has moved around a lot as the shop has evolved. It originally started along the right-hand wall, then moved to the left-hand wall, and now it's on the back wall. Behind the miter saw is the second of the 2 metal pegboard setups in the shop. Screwbacco watches over all of my drills. Opposite the drills is where I store all of my finishing supplies on these shelves that easily hook into the pegboard. As far as the saw itself, this is a 12-inch miter saw. Now these things are notorious for poor dust collection. I did try and enclose it and the shop vac is hooked up directly to it, but I can still tell you it makes a big mess. Now the 2 faceplates of the hood are attached with, you guessed it, magnets. And if I need to make an angled cut, they're easily removed, and then I can put them back in place. On the top of the miter station, I added a T-track with a stop block and a measuring tape to make it easier for repeated cuts. But again, I really don't use the miter saw unless I'm doing a rough breakdown or something that doesn't need to be terribly precise. I just prefer to use the Crosscut sled on the table saw. The planer lives below the miter saw. Now this is the one tool that I do use pretty frequently that I can't just use in place, but it is very easy to roll this thing out. It's on a Harbor Freight dolly with a piece of old plywood, and if I'm doing short stock, I will typically mill it right where I'm standing, and anything longer in the main drag by the jointer. In the back right corner is my clamp wall. Now pegboard really shines for small item storage, but French cleats should be your go-to for big heavy items like clamps. I use the pipe and the parallel clamps for the majority of my big panel glue-ups or cabinet type builds. I use the DeWalt trigger clamps for everyday clamping during the middle of projects. And quite honestly, I don't find myself reaching for the F-style clamps much these days. And in the center of the shop is the pride of Lincoln Street Woodworks, my Outfeed assembly table, which measures 6x4. It's a torsion box design. The inner core is made of MDF, and the top is a 3/4 inch piece of plywood with a vinyl laminate. As far as the base is concerned, I am eventually going to build some drawers and other storage into it, but quite honestly, the price of plywood is way too high right now to take on a project like that. On 3 of the 4 sides of the table, I routed out dovetails for the microjig match fit system. If you're unfamiliar with this system, the clamps ride through the dovetails and allow you to turn the entire side of the table into a vise. For larger stock, I added a panel that drops down to just above the floor to give me unlimited clamping options. Now, I would like to add in some dovetails to the top of the table, but I haven't quite landed on the exact location yet. On the left side of the base, I keep my sustainers for the track saws, domino, and sander. Now, I did find amazing deals on these Festool tools, and I do have a video on my tips and tricks to help you find great deals yourself. Check out the link above. In the front of the table, I keep my oscillating spindle sander, the Sandalorian, another great marketplace deal. Grit is the way. And last but not least is a new addition to the shop, and probably my favorite project I've done in terms of overall improvements, my boom arm. Hiding on the side of the assembly table is a CT MIDI that is connected to a dust deputy and then up the wall to the boom arm itself. I do try and use the blade guard as often as possible on my table saw, so this easily connects to the back, and then I can turn on the vacuum when it's time to make cuts with this Bluetooth remote. For the small hand tools such as the track saws, sanders, and domino, I have an extension cord that is zip tied to the boom arm and connected to the vacuum, so when the tool turns on, the vacuum automatically turns on with it. I really like this setup. It makes switching between the blade guard and the small tools extremely quick, and the boom arm neatly tucks away when not in use. Alright, that does it for the 2021 shop tour. I hope you picked up a couple tips on how to organize your shop and lay out your tools. Remember, we all got to start somewhere. I've been building this collection for over 6 years. This didn't happen overnight. If you want to learn more about my principles for setting up a small workshop, check out the video above, and I'll see you guys on the next one.